The Florida Project is a film that came out last year, so why am I reviewing it now, long after it's lost its relevance? Well, that is a tale of irony. That irony being that because I lived in, Florida, I didn't have access to a theater that was screening The Florida Project, which had a pretty limited release, and that was unfortunate, but the patrons have spoken, and this month, The Florida Project is the chosen review, which I can't really complain about because I have been meaning to watch this film for a while. In preparation, I watched Sean Baker's previous film, Tangerine, which I had also been meaning to watch since it came out, and that was great. I was apprehensive to the iPhone approach, but it actually catered to the film incredibly well because LA is a shithole, and the flat, muddled, jittery iPhone aesthetic just accentuated that perfectly. For this film, Baker has chosen the only place in the world that's an even bigger shithole than LA. Orlando! Orlando has all the bad stuff that LA has, virtually none of the good stuff, and even more exclusive to Orlando bad stuff. It has the same horrendous traffic that LA has, the same blistering sun, the same piece of shit gift shops and other tourist traps. It's just as unnecessarily spread out as LA. It has no beach, even though most Florida beaches are worse than LA beaches anyway. It has no film industry, no music industry. No one important lives there unless you consider the Orlando magic important. We have Disney and Universal like LA, but from what I've heard, LA's parks are a lot better than Orlando's. Kind of a bad Floridian, I've never been to Disney World. There's humidity, so it's not just dry heat. The streets are held together by this horribly ugly and kind of not secure tar. Everyone is on meth. When it's not excruciatingly hot, it's raining, but it's the kind of rain where it's still sunny. We call them, sun showers. Everyone's upset, which I can see why. They live in fucking Orlando. Even the schools. LA has USC, UCLA, Caltech, Pomona, LMU, AFI, a bunch of other great schools. What does Orlando have? UCF? Valencia? I've got friends at UCF, my brother goes to Valencia, they'll attest to how much of a shithole Orlando is. The worst part is that people actually vacation there. People actually fly in from out of state to spend time in Orlando. It makes me miserable that people spend money on themselves and their kids to inhale crack secondhand through the air. How is Orlando such a tourist spot? Sure, Disney and SeaWorld and Universal are redeeming qualities, but that's like offering Sonny Corleone a fucking band-aid. There's really only so much they can do. And even SeaWorld isn't so much of a redeeming quality anymore, because people now understand that animals are being abused there. In addition to these big parks, we also have a bunch of cheap, decrepit parks where you have to sign a contract before you go on a ride so they don't get in trouble if you die, because that's such a possibility. And these are especially bad in Kissimmee, which is technically the greater Orlando area and is a giant shithole in and of itself, but the movie still covers Kissimmee. These are the kind of parks that do helicopter rides like what's featured in the movie. They're usually on the side of the road and blend in with the power lines, and nobody knows they're there unless you're like 15 pages deep in TripAdvisor and have literally nowhere else to go. Orlando is the worst place on earth. And now that that's off my chest, let's talk about this movie. Maybe I should talk about some of the good stuff about Florida that's featured in the movie. Orange World, Twisty Treat. I didn't realize Twisty Treat was Florida exclusive, but I looked on the map. Aside from one location in Texas, yeah, it's all in Florida. I highly recommend it. I have this exact Florida mug, not one that says grandma. If I were home right now, I would go to the kitchen and bring it here and show you, but I own that mug. I got a weird nostalgic feeling when I heard these frogs croaking.
Be careful because it has fire.
I don't know if that's like a southern thing because I haven't spent an extensive amount of time anywhere else in the South, or if it's just a Florida thing, but reminded me of like eating dinner out back or something. I don't know, it was weird. There are brief flashes of Publix, the only beacon of hope in Florida, and that's about it. Everything else in the movie is just shitty Orlando being shitty. Again, this film has a lot of similarities to Tangerine, but it's absolutely different enough to distinguish itself. The use of 35mm film and the vibrant color scheme suggest that the film is trying to find an inner beauty within this shithole, and within the context of the film, it certainly does. This is a gorgeous looking film, but I can guarantee that Florida is a lot more beautiful on 35mm film than it is in real life. I kind of see the Magic Castle Motel as an emblem of this. It's got this really beautiful purple paint job, but it's still a shitty motel in Orlando. I guess the difference here is that the motel is beautiful on the outside and ugly on the inside, and Orlando is kind of the opposite. In the film. In real life, Orlando's hideous inside and out. But I digress. This approach differs from Tangerine because that film is mostly a pessimistic view of that community, despite the humor in it. The Florida Project, despite its kind of depressing ending, is a mostly uplifting view of life, and even in its depressing ending, it still remains uplifting in its presentation, which caters to the childlike perspective of the world that we're seeing here. Tangerine's pacing is great because, like, 30 seconds in, we get the inciting incident, and from there on, the movie moves like a bullet through this very narrow narrative thread, and along this fast-paced journey, we then learn about the characters and the setting. This film takes a completely mirrored approach to this. For the first, hour of this film, there's really no discernible story going on. It's just a slice-of-life film, and through learning about these characters and this setting, we then begin to pick up on narrative threads, which, of course, become more of the focus in the last 30 minutes or so. Both of these approaches work brilliantly, and that's due to Sean Baker's ability as a filmmaker, as a writer, all of these actors' ability to improvise, to embody their characters. The first 2/3 of this film are almost just a collection of short films that could have been written the morning of shooting. In fact, if I found out that that was their approach, I wouldn't be surprised at all, but it works perfectly. It paints such a great vignette of life in this terrible, terrible place. The characters have incredibly basic motivations. Hallie to make rent and provide for Mooney, Bobby to run things smoothly and to maintain a relationship with his son, despite trouble with his presumable ex-wife, and the kids to enjoy their summer. And not these incredibly epic, complex, 1,000-layered characters that you may come to expect from a film that has a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, 92 Metascore. But I don't think real people are as nuanced as those kinds of characters, or at least not in the same way. People are inconsistent. They contradict themselves. People find themselves in shitty situations and don't really care. People are kind of dumb, and I think this is one of the most authentic human portrayals I've ever seen. Even in Tangerine, which I'll stop comparing this film to soon, the characters feel like they were designed in a theatrical way to mirror and oppose each other and whatnot. Here it just feels like a bunch of people crammed together in a film. The performances are mostly improvised, so they're mostly great. There was one scene where, for a moment, Ashley wasn't really selling me. It sounded like she wasn't being as vocally expressive as she could have. But again, that's how people talk, and in that sense, this is kind of the anti-movie movie. I got that same sense from Tangerine.
Taylor, you said you'd stop talking about Tangerine.
You're right. Sorry, Rabbi Goldberg. That said, the writing wasn't always top-notch. There are moments, I assume they were scripted because they kind of needed to be, where exposition was provided, and it totally felt like exposition. Like it was not natural human dialogue at all, which, when there's so much improvised, just natural human conversation, it really stands out. These moments were sparse, but they did get on my nerves. There's not much I disliked about this film. I guess they could have done a better job developing the relationship between Mooney and Jancy. We see them have all these moments and stuff, and from the context of the film, seeing them meet for the first time, you'd think we'd have a better sense of their connection than we got. But maybe it just doesn't feel like enough time passed. With Scooty, you can tell they've been best friends for a while. They start out together, and the bond between them feels so much more inherently linked, whereas with Jancy, there's a sense of distance that never fully goes away, despite getting close. Which isn't necessarily a big problem, but at the very end she says goodbye to Scooty, not yet understanding the situation, and once she learns the truth, she runs to Jancy and tells her, "You're my best friend, I may never see you again," all that. And I understand logistically why she had to say goodbye to Scooty first. But if she and Jancy had the same bond that she and Scooty had, this moment would have been more impactful. That said, Brooklyn Prince's performance in this scene is just soul-crushing. From the line delivery to the mannerisms, like biting her fingers while she's crying, I just wanted to bawl my fucking eyes out. The worst part of this movie comes next, though. Sean Baker employs his iPhone again, and at the emotional climax of this gorgeously shot movie, we get this horribly jarring cut to iPhone footage. They said this was so that they could film in Disney World without permission, which is whatever. And even the Disney footage doesn't look horrible, but the footage of them running to Disney looks so bad in comparison to what we just saw. Not just the fact that it was shot on iPhone hardware and the quality wasn't as good and it's digital instead of film, the camera work in this running sequence looks like it has no thought behind it, like they just pointed the iPhone and ran with them. In fact, I'd believe that this is what they did, probably saying something like it represents how Mooney and Jancy weren't thinking about their actions, running away without any thought. And I can get behind that, but even the stabilization is bad. I mean, look at that. The jarring transition may resemble the jarring, spur of the moment, not allowed to do this nature of the scene and their actions, but I think it was possible to still convey this sense while maintaining photographic consistency. If they can't sneak a Panavision 35mm camera and Arri Alexa lenses into Disney World, which is understandable, they can at least sneak in something that could more closely resemble that look from a distance while running. Disney lets people bring DSLRs. Sure, the cut to DSLR footage would also be jarring, but I'm sure there's a way to make it look consistent, because the way it looks just totally abruptly cut off the emotional impact of this scene. Also, I'm a fan of the idea of endings that seem happy on the surface, but are really sad when you get down deep, but I don't think that's quite what this ending is, because even in the characters' heads, where they're running away to Disney and having fun instead of facing reality, it's impossible for us as an audience to forget that sooner or later they're gonna find Mooney and they're gonna send her to that family in Polk County, which is like the 1997 meth distribution capital of the world or some shit, which, fun fact, is the county right next to mine. And if they're not found, then what? They're gonna be homeless beggars in Disney World? Something like Princess Mononoke comes to mind, when it presents itself entirely as though everything is worked out, and it's not until leaving the film and thinking about the implications that you realize things really aren't that happy. But here it kind of, in this last moment, feels like the movie is begging us to believe this lie of happiness, and it really needs to present itself in a more believable way for this to really work like it was intended to. That said, I'm so glad I loved this movie. I was apprehensive because, aside from the really high critic scores, I had heard a lot of polarizing things, and it wasn't nominated for the Oscars, even though the Oscars don't really mean anything, but nonetheless. I guess I'll put it somewhere among the high 8, low 9 area. If you want a firm number, just go with 8, but I did love this movie. Thank you for watching, thank you for suggesting, thank you patrons for giving me your money, and for those who aren't patrons yet, consider pledging so that, you can give me money. Exciting news, after over a year of being online, my short film Ketchup is now on IMDb and Letterboxd, so go give that a rating. And if you haven't seen it yet, what are you still doing here? Go watch it. It's great, I promise, you'll love it. I actually can't promise that. You could very easily hate it, and I'd understand. I'd be a little sad, but I'd understand. But there's only one way to know for sure, which is to watch it, so go do that. I'm gonna end this video now.